Hey folks, this is Kalani. The public test realm just keeps getting updated week after week. We're going to end up with an entirely different patch if they keep this up. There's new catch-up gear available from the assaults in 8.3, the new corruption system has had several parts ripped out and remodeled again, and the dev team has decided to go a little bit crazy when it comes to corrupted weapons specifically. Let's take a closer look. Catch-up mechanics are always welcome when you have an alt army that's been left behind for a little too long. The last catch-up mechanic, when it comes to gear at any rate, did a little bit more than it was initially intended to. The benthic gear system in the Najatar zone provided a very quick gearing up path for new characters and alts, but it also served to provide best in slot gear to pretty much everyone. Mythic raiders are still running around with full sets of socketed benthic gear because you just can't beat it in the Eternal Palace raid. I don't think we'll see anything quite that powerful in patch 8.3, but we do have a first glimpse of what the new catch-up system is going to look like. I said this gear comes from the assaults in patch 8.3, but I guess that's only partially true. You can actually get these gear tokens from a variety of sources which are tied to the assaults, even just killing monsters, and the assaults are always going to be active, at least one in each zone. The more random mobs you kill, the more rares you hunt down, and just the more active you are in these assaults, the more catch-up gear tokens you're going to find. They'll probably squirrel away some in the chests you can find as well, just to keep you on your toes. These gear tokens are called Black Empire gear, and they'll always have the armor type and the armor slot in the name as well. So Black Empire cloth leggings, Black Empire mail boots, you get the picture. That might change by the time this patch goes live, but I kind of doubt it. The name tells you everything you need to know. It's a piece of gear that came from the Black Empire, fantastic, and it will turn into a very specific piece of gear when you decide to open it up. A Black Empire leather boots token isn't ever going to give you a pair of gloves, no, that would just be silly. So the name does its job really, doesn't it? They don't seem to be super rare either, so you should see quite a few in your travels which can be used to help gear up your main character, or if you end up having a higher item level than what this gear has to offer, you can send them over to any alts you have waiting in the wings. All of these tokens are bind on account, so you can collect them on your favourite bank character and send a full set over to any alts you fancy picking up in patch 8.3. We've seen this kind of BoA token catch-up gear mechanic in the past, quite a few times actually, and honestly I think it works incredibly well. You're incentivized to stay active on your main character because even if the gear drops for your main toon and you can't use it, you can still send it over to an alt. It's not going to get wasted. Account-bound gear catch-up always works so much better than individual character catch-ups because you don't feel like you're wasting time or effort when you get something you wish you could have sent over to an alt. With this kind of system, you win every time. The benthic gear tried to do something similar, but the power level of that particular gear set was tuned a little too high, and it resulted in people farming on their alts to funnel gear into their mains. It ended up being a bit backwards really, but it looks like the dev team has learned from that lesson and is going back to the tried and true methods of gear catch-up from the past. I guess item level is probably the most important factor when you consider whether a gear catch-up mechanic is going to be worth investing your time into. So this loot can drop at 2 different item levels for whatever reason. All of the Azerite gear will be item level 415 when you use the tokens and create a piece of gear, while anything that isn't Azerite gear will be down at item level 410. In previous PTR builds, this was actually all the way down at item level 400, which would have put it on par with the new crafting gear recipes that are being introduced with patch 8.3 as well. That would have given crafted gear a bit more of a market share in the catch-up business for 8.3, because it would be the exact same thing as the tokens dropping from assaults and rares and whatnot, except it would be a lot more accessible. It's always going to be faster and more efficient to buy your gear from the auction house if you have the gold to spare. That's probably why they decided to give the tokens a bit of an item level bump, to make sure that the stuff that requires actual effort in obtaining it has a bit of a leg up on the stuff you can just buy from another player. That doesn't make crafted gear completely useless though. You probably won't get full sets of the BoA token gear for quite a while. Filling in those gaps easily is still going to give crafted gear a very large market. I know players who have made hundreds of thousands of gold in the first few weeks of a patch just focusing focusing on crafted gear, it's still going to sell like hotcakes. The weird part is taking Azerite gear up higher than the other pieces. I know Azerite gear has a few issues with item level scaling. It's always been in item level increments of 15, even if that doesn't match up with the rest of the rewards on offer. Mythic Plus weekly chests are a fantastic example of that, but with this catch-up gear, it looks like Blizzard decided item level 410 was the right marker. They were happy with that number, but couldn't make Azerite gear fit into it, so they just bumped it up a bit higher. Having everything at 415 would be less confusing and more rewarding for current content and help get rid of benthic gear faster. Seriously, I can't wait to get rid of some of those items. I've passed on amazing item level upgrades because benthic gear is just so strong. But remember that one of the main reasons that benthic gear is so strong is because of the special effects. Those effects are only enabled in Nazjatar and the Eternal Palace, and we're moving on to the next raid tier with patch 8.3, so benthic gear effects simply won't work anymore. That should help move us past that system as well, though if you've managed to save up your mana pearls and equipped yourself with the best benthic gear, all with sockets, and upgraded it all to 425, these new gear tokens won't have anything for you. It will all simply be for alt gearing at that point, but I think that's what the majority of players will be using this system for anyway. Now if we could only get something to help out our alts with catching up with essences, that would be fantastic. We're not just limited to the 415 item level tokens though, quite a few of the assaults also have the ability to reward you with 445 item level gear, which is going to be quite considerable for people who aren't able to get themselves into the higher Mythic Plus dungeons or into the raids for Heroic and above. That kind of item level reward only comes from the Black Empire assaults from what I've seen, so that's going to be once per week. Moving on, I also mentioned some further changes to corruption. I know, you're probably sick of hearing that word already. Corruption this, corruption that. Maybe an entire Void expansion would have been a bad idea after all. I'll try and get through this decently quickly, but honestly with how many changes they're piling onto the PTR, I really do wonder what the system is going to look like when the patch actually goes live. Thankfully, every update does seem to be a step in the right direction, so at least they're listening and reiterating on this specific feature quite a lot. So first things first for corruption, if you've been keeping up to date with it, you should know the second negative effect you'll have to deal with is the corruption zone. This plops down whenever you use abilities, and it just deals damage. The more corruption you have, the more damage it deals, and the larger the zone gets. That negative effect has been stripped out completely. In its place, we now have Eye of Corruption. Your spells and abilities have a chance to summon an Eye of Corruption for 8 seconds. The Eye inflicts increasing shadow damage to you every 2 seconds while you remain in range. The range and damage increases with further corruption. So it's kind of the same, but it has two very distinct differences. The first is the visual effect. The corruption zone just plonked down a huge black cloud by your feet, making it impossible to see anything else nearby. That could be a problem for any number of reasons, but mainly it would cover up any bad AoE patches on the ground that you're not supposed to be standing in. Standing in a death cloud might be alright for a little bit, but standing in a death cloud on top of a patch of fire that you can't see will probably just mean death. The eye is a little floating eye with a clear purple ring marking the proximity of the effect. If you step outside of the purple circle, you'll be perfectly fine. You can also see everything else going on around you because it doesn't cover up the entire floor anymore, and the other difference is the ramping damage. Corruption zones in the build before this didn't really hurt at all. You could actually stand in them quite comfortably as long as you didn't have a stupid amount of corruption. This eye debuff forces you to make a decision. Get out immediately to avoid all of the damage, stick around for the lower end of the damage, or try and brave the entire effect. It still doesn't do too much damage when you have a low corruption value, but you should still probably use a minor personal defensive towards the end of the effect. So the second negative effect is still a zone denial ability, but it works in a less invasive way and it should end up keeping you on your toes just a bit more. There's one other major change for the corruption system as a whole, and this involves the legendary Cloak. When you upgrade the Cloak enough, you'll start to see extra effects pop up. Previously, this was an equip effect that granted you a huge amount of primary stat. This would have been a massive DPS increase when you got to this upgrade point, and it would make the legendary cloak vital to your performance in every type of content. When I say the PTR has been chopping and changing incredibly frequently, this is a prime example. I think that equip effect lasted maybe a week because it's no longer there, or at least it's no longer there on a rank 7 cloak. It might pop back up when you get above rank 10 or something, but for now it's been replaced with an on-use effect. Dispel any effects of N'Zoth's corruption and become immune to any further corruption effects for 6 seconds. That's on a 3-minute cooldown. This adds yet another piece to the corruption puzzle. The cloak will allow you to remove and negate existing conditions and provide immunity to all corruption effects for 6 seconds afterwards. So if you get a really bad eye spawn and you absolutely can't move, you can pop your cloak for a reset of sorts. If you're running around with a lot of corruption and you get a Grand Illusions creature chasing you at a really bad time, just pop your cloak and suddenly it doesn't matter anymore. This could potentially allow you to run more dangerous levels of corruption and be fine, providing you use your cloak cooldown wisely. I think this is a really interesting decision. It gives the cloak more power, so it incentivizes you to upgrade it faster and more often, and it also gives the player more choice on how you can interact with corruption. You can outright deny it for 6 seconds on a 3-minute timer, and if something tries to kill you at a really inconvenient moment, you can say, "No sir, not today. I will stand here for the duration of my major cooldown, and there's nothing corruption can do about it." That's going to be a really good feeling in an otherwise completely random system. And then to polish this video off, corrupted weapons are getting a little out of control. The corruption values for weapons used to be all the same, a straight 25 corruption. That was the highest corruption value we had seen after everything became static. In the current build, those same raid weapons have corruption values that are all over the place. We have some still at 25, others at 35, a handful at 50, and even one weapon at 75 corruption. That is absolutely insane. You can trigger every single negative effect tied to the corruption system by equipping a single weapon? I honestly don't know how this is going to pan out at this rate. It looks like they're just playing around with numbers, or maybe they're going through each effect one by one and giving them a corruption value they think fits the power level of that item. That's a big yikes for two-handed strength users right now. That's not the only change though. We assumed that these effects were going to be restricted to the raid weapons in the new Ny'alotha raid tier. That's the only place we had seen them, and all of these weapons come with their respective effects baseline. It's not random whether they're corrupted or not. At least that's what it looks like from the dungeon journal. But that might not be the case. This might not be just restricted to raid weapons. WoW had reported that they received a whole variety of items with these powerful corruption bonuses from the weekly Mythic Plus cache, and it looks like all of these effects also have different tiers of power. That might be why we're seeing such high levels of corruption now, but as you can see, you can get rings or trinkets with these corruption effects. It looks like you can get any item with the raid weapon corruption effects on them, besides the few slots that are taken up by Azerite gear, obviously. This kind of changes the whole corruption game. Out with the old boring corruption effects, and in with the new powerful effects that might actually be worth dealing with some of the negative effects for. If you can stack some of these across several different slots, you could end up with a crazy powerful setup. And that's kind of what I want to see with this type of system. It's the last patch of the expansion. This stuff isn't going to matter at all for Shadowlands, and if they want this system to be fun and worth exploring and playing around with, make the effects something to chase after. They need to be powerful, and we might actually be moving in that direction. The 75 corruption on some of these items still worries me though. There's no point giving an item a huge bonus if it's never going to be usable. A 75 corruption item just doesn't seem usable whatsoever. But as I said, this stuff is changing week to week. I guess we'll have to wait and see what changes next. From what I understand, all of the previewed items here with the more powerful effects did come from a weekly Mythic Plus cache on the PTR, so the more powerful effects might be restricted to the gear you get from the cache and might not be available on items that corrupt randomly from normal drops. We'll just have to wait and see if that's the case, but that might give Mythic Plus caches a huge boost over any other form of gear. That's kind of exciting, but we'll have to see how it pans out. But that's it for this video. What do you think of the changes for the Corruption Zone negative effect? What about the legendary Cloak on use that allows you to ignore corruption debuffs on a 3-minute cooldown? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave. If you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.